The government of national unity has been hijacked by Jama-ah, a small Islamic party that wants to control the way that you think. Here's how it's happening. For the last few months, it's been no secret that the ANC and its allies have been gravitating towards the Islamic world, particularly Iran and its proxies in the Middle East, while deserting the United States and other Western allies. But while this has been a long-standing foreign policy stance, it's never actually been codified into South African law. But thanks to a small party called Jama-ah, that might all change. But before we get into this shocking revelation, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel? It's completely free, and all you have to do is click on the subscribe button below this video. Now let's begin. Alright, so here we have the official press release from Jama-ah, but rather than read through the entire thing, I'm just going to highlight what's important because there is quite a lot of unnecessary background being given and very lengthy lingo. So here it goes. Historic new bill to criminalize apartheid takes center stage as South Africa leads global fight against racial segregation. So, in a landmark move echoing the continent's historic struggle for liberation, a new private member's bill, the implementation of the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid Bill 2025, otherwise more aptly known as the Apartheid Bill, is set to be introduced in Parliament. So the bill, championed by the Jama-ah political party on behalf of a power secretariat of 8 represented political parties, seeks to domesticate the United Nations International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid, which South Africa acceded to on 14th of May 2024. And so far, we can see how this bill really seems to be centered on the South African context of what apartheid was pre-1994, but we'll actually notice how all of that changes. Here, I'm going to point out the exact paragraph which we really need to take into consideration, which is, the draft legislation will create a standalone crime of apartheid distinct from existing provisions under the implementation of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court Act. And so this is quite peculiar because all of a sudden, what they're saying is that there's going to be a separate crime of apartheid, unlike the one used to prosecute those guilty of apartheid pre-1994 in South Africa. And it continues. It will grant extraterritorial jurisdiction to South African courts to prosecute individuals, South African citizens or residents, or persons present in South Africa for apartheid crimes committed anywhere, including in South Africa. And so what this suggests is that any place in the world where Jama-ah and its ilk deem there to be apartheid, individuals, specifically South African citizens or residents, or people who are just simply present in South Africa, can be charged for the crime of apartheid. And this is quite important to note because we've already seen how apartheid has been used to label many instances across the world, regardless of whether or not they actually constitute apartheid by the South African definition. Probably the most famous example is Israel, where Jama-ah and other supporters, or should we call them anti-Israel actors, have accused Israel of committing apartheid. And so what this bill suggests is that anybody who is pro-Israel, or perhaps served in the IDF, which is a separate matter, or simply just speaks of Israel's right to self-determination, could be seen as guilty of committing apartheid. Because, of course, if Israel is alleged to be committing apartheid and you are supportive of, well, Israel, then indirectly you could be accused of supporting apartheid. And of course, this could be applied to other situations as well. For example, we know that the United States had its own segregation laws, and specifically racial segregation, back in the day of the Jim Crow laws. And so if someone was to say that perhaps the United States is an apartheid state, then all of a sudden, those who are deemed to be pro-West actors could be viewed as supporting apartheid crimes, and they too could be prosecuted under this new bill. Now, as we see in the next paragraph, the way that the bill will work is that it will require consent from the National Director of Public Prosecutions before prosecution. So it will designate a high court to handle such cases following consultation with the Chief Justice and NDPP. The bill makes provision for the appointment of a specialist committee to investigate apartheid-related complaints and to make recommendations to the minister responsible for the apartheid bill regarding those complaints. Now, what's incredibly important to note here is that, yes, the protection of the court as well as the NDPP could come into play. But as we know, first of all, the ANC very much is still the driving force of the government, including the GNU. And secondly, we already know that when it comes to apartheid-related complaints, the ANC has already pretty much classified Israel as being an apartheid state. They've gone one step further, accusing it of genocide, as was the reason for them opening the ICJ case. And so it's pretty clear that the subjects of Israel will certainly come into play, and it remains to be seen whether other regions of the world will also come into play with this bill. Now, if we take a look down here, the bill has amassed a lot of support. We see here that Jama-ah is piloting the bill on behalf of the Secretariat, which consists of the following 8 parties. So it's the ANC, no surprise there, the EFF, Good Party, National Coloured Congress, Pan-African Congress, Rise Mzansi, MK, and then, of course, Jama-ah. And so if we take a look at all of those parties, they make up about 2/3 of the parliament in South Africa. And so this bill should pass fairly easily with their support. However, the bill may actually struggle for a pretty interesting reason. Some of the parties that are not included in this list are actually the main members of the GNU. They include the DA, the IFP, the Patriotic Alliance, and the Freedom Front Plus. We also see how certain other parties, such as Action SA and ACDP, also haven't lent their support to this motion. And so it's really important to note that while the ANC and its allies might band together to push this through, enacting this bill is easier said than done. And that is for 2 reasons. So the first reason why I say the bill might not be able to be enacted is due to the legal process. So the DA, as well as civil society organizations such as Sakeliga, have a very strong track record of taking the government to court. We've seen this on numerous occasions. We've seen this with expropriation without compensation, where the DA has advanced its case. And then we've also seen it when Sakeliga has taken the government to court as well, especially when speaking about BEE in the real estate industry, among other cases. And what we've noticed is that those 2 parties have been very good at combating the government on the legal front in courts. And while we haven't yet seen what the terminology of the bill actually looks like, as it hasn't been released yet, you can be pretty certain that these parties and their legal teams will certainly find a grounds for dismissal. And of course, we also know that the court process in South Africa moves very slowly. And so this bill could be locked up in the court for years. But a simpler and quicker way to actually shut the bill down is a political solution, and that is within the GNU's clearinghouse mechanism. So a few weeks ago, I actually released a video speaking about the clearinghouse mechanism and how it has finally adopted its terms of reference. And the link to that video is right above. But in case you only wanted to get the gist of the conversation, the clearinghouse mechanism is a dispute resolution body within the GNU. And the reason it exists is to ensure that no specific party, such as the ANC, can simply push its agenda through the legislative process without the other GNU partners' agreement. So as we can see from this press release from the Presidency of South Africa, the GNU's clearinghouse mechanism has been finalized and it's been implemented. And as explained by the working group that actually formulated this body, firstly, This clearinghouse mechanism has a dispute resolution process flow diagram that clarifies the decision-making process of the GNU clearinghouse mechanism. Secondly, it clarified that the clearinghouse mechanism is a recommending body, not a decision-making structure. Thirdly, it proposed monthly meetings. Fourthly, it proposed that unresolved issues be referred to the Political Leaders Forum and not the President. This point is very important because, as we saw with the NHI, for example, Ramaphosa pretty much just overlooked everybody's complaints about the legislation and decided to simply just sign it into law, despite GNU partners lodging their opposition. And so this at least creates a bit of a buffer where he can't just sign anything into law, and instead they do need to discuss it. And of course, with the aforementioned monthly meetings, perhaps these parties are able to find a civil compromise to these sorts of issues, particularly this contentious apartheid bill. Lastly, the working group supported a resolution to agree to disagree when consensus fails. Now, of course, this point could mean that the ANC completely disregards what its GNU partners have to say and advances the bill. But then the ANC are going to have to ask themselves, is this within our best interest? You see, while many people may allege that the ANC does not care about the country or that they'll do anything to advance the agenda, one thing we can be sure about with the ANC is that they are self-serving. They want to preserve their success, and they know, as well as anybody else, that if they are to toss their GNU partners to the side and rather work with the likes of the MK and EFF parties, they put their support levels at risk. You see, not only are these parties incredibly difficult to work with, as we've seen through their own internal scuffles, but they're also the kinds of parties that are looking to defeat the ANC from within. And so the ANC know that they are very big threats to their survival, whereas the likes of the DA and the Freedom Front Plus are not so much. And so what we see here is a very worrying situation. Of course, it does seem that the apartheid bill can be stopped in its tracks if those in opposition are vigilant about it, but it still signals a very problematic situation whereby the ANC and its natural allies will not stop on their quest to firstly alienate South Africa from the West and critical trade partners on that side of things, while getting closer to the likes of Iran, who really don't have that much to offer to a country like South Africa. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you found it informative, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.